On a crisp autumn morning in Milwaukee, the marble halls of the county courthouse echoed with the usual bustle of justice being served. Judge Michael Thornton adjusted his black robes as he settled into his high-backed leather chair, his expression stern as he surveyed courtroom 302. At 62 years old, with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses, he had earned a reputation for being one of the strictest judges in the circuit. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge Thornton's clerk, Jenny Martinez, approached the bench with a stack of case files for the day. Her heels clicked against the floor as she organized the documents, placing them in neat piles before the judge. "Your Honor, we have 15 cases today," Jenny informed him quietly. "The first one is a traffic violation." Judge Thornton nodded, barely glancing at the name on the file, Sarah Richardson. He had handled thousands of traffic cases over his 25-year career, and they'd all seemed to blur together. The familiar routine of his courtroom was something he took pride in: swift justice, no exceptions, and certainly no excuses. The gallery began to fill with the day's defendants, their whispered conversations creating a low hum in the spacious courtroom. Officer Pete Davidson, a regular fixture in traffic court, stood near the prosecutor's table, reviewing his notes for the upcoming cases. He had written most of the tickets that would be contested today. As Judge Thornton reviewed the first case file, his eyes narrowed at the details. The defendant had been caught driving 40 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour school zone. Such blatant disregard for children's safety particularly irked him. He made a mental note to make an example of this case. The bailiff, Robert Thompson, a tall man with 20 years of courthouse experience, called the court to order. "All rise. The Circuit Court of Milwaukee County is now in session, the Honorable Judge Michael Thornton presiding." The rustling of people standing filled the room, followed by absolute silence as Judge Thornton raised his gavel. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with his position. The morning's first case was about to begin, and Judge Thornton had no idea that this routine traffic violation would become one of the most memorable moments of his career. He adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat, preparing to call the first case. "First case on the docket," he announced, "the State of Wisconsin versus Sarah Richardson, citation number 47,859, speeding in a school zone." The courtroom doors opened, and heads turned as a woman entered. She was dressed in a navy blue pantsuit, carrying a simple leather briefcase. Her appearance was professional and understated, yet there was something dignified about her bearing that seemed to command attention. Judge Thornton barely looked up as she approached the defendant's table. In his mind, this was just another routine case, one of the countless traffic violations he handled every week. He had already decided how he would handle it, based solely on the information in front of him. The morning light now fully illuminated the courtroom, and the American flag behind the judge's bench seemed to glow with an almost ethereal quality. The scene was set for what appeared to be just another ordinary day in Milwaukee's justice system. But sometimes, the most extraordinary moments come disguised as ordinary ones. Officer Davidson stepped forward, ready to present his evidence. The prosecutor shuffled his papers, preparing to state the case. And Sarah Richardson stood quietly at the defendant's table, her posture relaxed but dignified, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Little did Judge Thornton know that his next few decisions would not only challenge his preconceptions, but would also become a viral moment that would spark a national conversation about bias in the justice system. The day had only just begun, and the stage was set for a lesson in humility and justice that would resonate far beyond the walls of courtroom 302. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah Richardson stood at the defendant's table. Judge Thornton glanced briefly at her over his reading glasses, his expression remaining impassive. The morning light cast shadows across his stern features as he began the proceedings with his characteristic efficiency. "Ms. Richardson, you are charged with driving 40 miles per hour in a clearly marked 25-mile-per-hour school zone. How do you plead?" His voice carried the same tone he used for countless traffic violations before. Sarah stood straight, her hands clasped in front of her. "Your Honor, while I acknowledge the violation, I would like to explain the circumstances if the court permits." Her voice was clear and measured, carrying a natural authority that made several heads in the gallery turn. Judge Thornton's lip curled slightly. In his experience, everyone had an excuse. "The posted speed limit is not a suggestion," Ms. Richardson. It exists to protect our children. But please, enlighten us about what was so important that it justified endangering young lives. Officer Davidson, who had written the ticket, stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may. On the morning in question, at approximately 8:15 a.m., I recorded Ms. Richardson's vehicle traveling at 40 miles per hour in the school zone on Madison Street. The weather was clear, and all speed limit signs were clearly visible. Sarah listened patiently, maintaining her composure. When Officer Davidson finished, she began to speak. Your Honor, I was on my way to. Ms. Richardson, Judge Thornton interrupted, holding up his hand. I've heard every excuse imaginable in this courtroom. Late for work, family emergency, didn't see the signs. The fact remains that you were significantly over the speed limit in a school zone. The gallery watched as Sarah attempted once again to explain. Your Honor, I understand the seriousness of the violation. However, nothing. Judge Thornton cut in again, his patience visibly wearing thin. The law is clear on this matter. School zones require extra caution, extra attention, and strict adherence to posted limits. Jenny Martinez, the clerk, had been watching the exchange with growing concern. She had noticed something in Sarah's file that seemed important, but Judge Thornton's rapid-fire handling of the case left no opening for her to intervene. The morning sun now streamed directly through the windows, creating a harsh glare that seemed to emphasize the tension in the room. Several observers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something was off about this particular proceeding. Judge Thornton shuffled the papers before him, barely looking at Sarah as he continued. Ms. Richardson, her driving record shows no previous violations, which I will take into consideration. However, the speed recorded was significantly over the limit, and in a school zone, such violations cannot be taken lightly. Sarah remained poised, her expression neutral despite the judge's dismissive tone. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed at odds with the treatment she was receiving, yet she made no protest against the judge's interruptions. The bailiff, Robert Thompson, had been watching the proceedings with growing unease. In his 2 decades at the courthouse, he had developed a keen sense for when something wasn't quite right. The way this defendant carried herself, her articulate attempts to speak, and her calm demeanor in the face of interruption. Something about this scene felt different from the usual traffic court proceedings. Officer Davidson stood to the side, also beginning to sense that this case wasn't following the usual pattern. He glanced at his notes again, wondering if he had missed something important about the defendant. The morning continued to progress, with Judge Thornton maintaining his strict demeanor, unaware that his next actions would soon make headlines across the state. The scene was building toward a moment that would force him to confront his own biases and preconceptions in a very public way. The gallery watched in silence as Judge Thornton prepared to deliver his ruling, completely unaware of the true identity of the woman standing before him. In just a few moments, his world would be turned upside down, and this routine traffic court session would become anything but ordinary. Judge Thornton leaned forward in his chair, ready to deliver his ruling. The morning had progressed as usual, and to him, this was just another case of a speeding violation that needed to be dealt with swiftly and firmly. Ms. Richardson, he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, having reviewed the evidence presented by Officer Davidson and considering your clean driving record, I am still troubled by the severity of this violation. Driving 15 miles over the speed limit in a school zone demonstrates a concerning disregard for public safety. Sarah stood quietly, maintaining her dignified composure. The sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows caught the silver threads in her dark hair, highlighting a face that showed years of experience and wisdom, details that Judge Thornton, in his haste, had failed to notice. This court takes school zone violations very seriously, he continued, shuffling papers on his bench. Children's safety is not negotiable. Therefore, I am imposing a fine of $500, to be paid within 30 days. Additionally, you will be required to attend a defensive driving course. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The fine was notably higher than usual for a first-time offense. Jenny Martinez, the clerk, frantically began searching through some papers, her face showing growing concern. Your Honor, Sarah began, her voice steady and professional, I would like to address. Ms. Richardson, Judge Thornton interrupted sharply, the time for explanations was earlier. The fine stands. This court will not tolerate excessive speeds in school zones, regardless of the circumstances or excuses. Officer Davidson shifted uncomfortably at his position near the prosecutor's table. In his years of service, he had never seen such a steep fine for a first offense, especially given the defendant's clean record. The bailiff, Robert Thompson, watched the scene unfold with increasing discomfort. Something about the judge's dismissive attitude toward this particular defendant seemed off, even by Judge Thornton's usually strict standards. Furthermore, Judge Thornton added, his tone becoming more lecturing, "I suggest you take this as a learning opportunity. The laws apply equally to everyone, regardless of their rush or personal circumstances." Sarah remained composed, though a slight tightening around her eyes suggested she was carefully measuring her response. The gallery watched in tense silence as she opened her briefcase, removing a single document. "Your Honor, I accept the court's ruling," she said calmly, "but for the record, I would like to submit this document to the court clerk." Jenny Martinez had finally found what she was looking for and was now trying desperately to catch Judge Thornton's attention. She waved a paper urgently, her face showing obvious distress. "The matter is closed, Ms. Richardson," Judge Thornton declared firmly, ignoring his clerk's attempts to get his attention. "Pay the fine within 30 days and attend the driving course. Next case." Just then, Jenny managed to reach the judge's bench, whispering something urgently in his ear. The color began to drain from Judge Thornton's face as he listened, his eyes widening as he finally took a proper look at the woman standing before him. The document Sarah had attempted to submit was now being passed to the clerk. Her official nomination papers for the position of State Chief Justice, complete with the governor's seal. The Morning Sun seemed to highlight the official golden seal on the paper as Jenny placed it on the judge's bench. The courtroom remained silent, the tension palpable as realization began to dawn on Judge Thornton's face. His quick judgment and dismissive attitude were about to become a lesson in humility that would reach far beyond the walls of his courtroom. Sarah Richardson stood patiently, her years of legal experience evident in her measured response to the situation. She had faced prejudice and dismissive attitudes throughout her career, and this moment would soon become another powerful example of why systemic change was necessary in the justice system. The atmosphere in courtroom 302 shifted dramatically as Judge Thornton stared at the document before him, his face growing increasingly pale. Jenny Martinez stood nervously by his side, watching as the reality of the situation slowly sank in. "Your Honor," Jenny whispered, though in the dead silence of the courtroom, her voice carried farther than intended. "Judge Sarah Richardson is currently the presiding judge of the State Appeals Court, and yesterday she was nominated by the governor as the next Chief Justice candidate." The gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Several attorneys present in the courtroom for other cases suddenly straightened in their seats, recognizing the name. Officer Davidson's eyes widened as he realized he had issued a ticket to one of the most respected legal minds in the state. Judge Thornton's hands trembled slightly as he removed his reading glasses, finally taking a proper look at the woman he had been lecturing just moments ago. Sarah Richardson's accomplished career was well known in legal circles, 20 years on the bench, numerous landmark decisions, and now, potentially the first black female Chief Justice in the state's history. I apologized, Your Honor," Judge Thornton stammered, his earlier authority crumbling. "Had I known." "Had you known what, Judge Thornton?" Sarah spoke quietly but firmly. "That I was a fellow judge, that I've served on the appeals court for the past decade, or that I'm nominated for Chief Justice." She paused, letting her words sink in. Should any of that matter in how justice is administered in this courtroom? The Morning Sun now seemed to cast an uncomfortable spotlight on Judge Thornton's bench. Robert Thompson, the bailiff, had seen many dramatic moments in this courtroom, but nothing quite like this. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. Several reporters who regularly covered the courthouse had been present for routine stories, but they were now furiously taking notes. This unexpected encounter between two judges, one white and male, the other black and female, was about to become tomorrow's headlines. "Your Honor," Judge Thornton began again, his voice notably softer, "please allow me to reconsider the fine and—" "No, Judge Thornton," Sarah interrupted firmly but respectfully. "The fine will stand. I was speeding in a school zone, and as you correctly stated, The law applies equally to everyone. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out her checkbook. I'll pay the fine now. Jenny Martinez watched in amazement as Sarah Richardson wrote out a check for $500, her hand steady and her expression serene. The gallery remained silent, witnessing a masterclass in dignity and professionalism. However, Sarah continued, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned courtroom. I would like to explain why I was speeding that morning, not as an excuse, but as context that any citizen deserves to provide in your courtroom. Judge Thornton nodded weakly, suddenly looking much older than his 62 years. The weight of his hasty judgments and interruptions hung heavily in the air. I was on my way to speak at a youth leadership program at Central High School, Sarah explained. A program that encourages young people, especially minorities, to consider careers in law and justice. I was running late because I had spent the morning at the Children's Hospital, visiting my nephew who had an emergency appendectomy. The irony was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. She had been speeding to inspire the next generation of legal professionals while being judged unfairly by the current one. Officer Davidson shifted uncomfortably, realizing that if he had taken a moment to listen when he issued the ticket, or if Judge Thornton had allowed her to explain, this situation might have unfolded very differently. The revelation continued to ripple through the courtroom as Sarah handed her check to the clerk. The morning's routine traffic court had transformed into a powerful moment that would soon spark discussions about bias, prejudice, and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or appearance. Judge Thornton sat in his chair, the morning sun now feeling more like an interrogation light, as he faced the consequences of his assumptions and hasty judgments. The day was far from over, and this incident would have repercussions that would extend far beyond this single morning in courtroom 302. As news of the morning's events began spreading through the courthouse, journalists frantically researched Sarah Richardson's remarkable career path. The story that emerged painted a picture of determination, excellence, and breaking barriers at every turn. Born to working-class parents in Milwaukee's inner city, Sarah had shown exceptional promise from an early age. Her mother worked as a high school janitor, while her father drove city buses. Despite their modest means, they had instilled in Sarah an unshakable belief in education and justice. In the courthouse hallway, veteran court reporter Mike Stevens shared details of Sarah's background with his younger colleagues. She graduated top of her class at Milwaukee Central High School, he explained, flipping through his old notes. Then she earned a full scholarship to Harvard Law School, where she finished magna cum laude. The story of her rise through the legal ranks was equally impressive. Starting as a public defender, Sarah had handled over 500 cases in her first 3 years, earning a reputation for thorough preparation and unwavering dedication to justice. Her colleagues from those early days remembered her working late into the night, often sleeping on the office couch to prepare for important cases. Back in courtroom 302, Judge Thornton sat in his chambers during the recess, reading through Sarah's professional biography with growing dismay. She had argued before the state Supreme Court 6 times, winning 5 of those cases. Her decisions on the appeals court had been cited by the U.S. Supreme Court twice. Jenny Martinez, still at her desk outside the judge's chambers, received calls from various media outlets. Yes, this is the same Judge Richardson who established the Youth Justice Initiative, she confirmed repeatedly. The program had helped hundreds of at-risk teens find mentorship in the legal profession. The courthouse security guard, Bill Matthews, remembered Sarah's early days as a young attorney. She would always stop and explain legal terms to the kids who came through here, he told a gathering of curious courthouse staff. Didn't matter if she was running late or had a big case, she made time for everyone. Sarah's work on the appeals court had been particularly noteworthy. She had written landmark decisions on civil rights, environmental protection, and criminal justice reform. Her opinions were known for their clarity and deep understanding of how legal decisions affected ordinary people's lives. Officer Davidson, still processing the morning's events, read through a recent profile of Sarah in the State Bar Journal. It detailed how she had overcome significant obstacles throughout her career. As one of only 3 black women in her law school class, she had faced both subtle and overt discrimination, but had never let it deter her. In the courthouse cafeteria, conversations buzzed about her recent nomination for Chief Justice. If confirmed, She would be not only the first black woman to hold the position but also one of the youngest Chief Justices in state history. Her nomination had received bipartisan support, with both Republican and Democratic senators praising her fair-minded approach to justice. The morning's incident began to take on deeper significance as more people learned about Sarah's background. Here was a woman who had spent her entire career fighting for equal justice, only to face the very bias she had worked so hard to eliminate. Sarah's clerk from the appeals court, David Chen, arrived at the courthouse after hearing about the incident. He shared stories about her mentorship of young lawyers, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. Judge Richardson always says that justice should be blind to status but not to humanity, he recalled. As the lunch hour approached, more details emerged about Sarah's community work. She had established a free legal clinic in her old neighborhood, volunteered at domestic violence shelters, and created a scholarship fund for minority law students. Her commitment to public service extended far beyond her official duties. The morning's events had inadvertently revealed something powerful. The person Judge Thornton had dismissed so casually was, in fact, one of the most accomplished and respected legal minds in the state. Her journey from a working-class background to the brink of becoming Chief Justice represented the very best of what the American legal system could offer. As the story of the traffic court incident spread, it became clear that this was more than just an embarrassing moment for one judge. It was a mirror reflecting the ongoing challenges faced by even the most accomplished individuals when confronted with unconscious bias and hasty judgments. When court resumed after the lunch recess, courtroom 302 was packed to capacity. Word had spread quickly through the legal community, and lawyers, law students, and courthouse staff lined the walls, eager to witness what would happen next. Judge Thornton emerged from his chambers, his usual confident stride replaced by a more measured pace. The morning's events had shaken him deeply, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own biases and assumptions. The court would like to address the events of this morning, he announced, his voice carrying the humility that surprised many regular attendees of his court. I would like to formally apologize to Judge Sarah Richardson for my conduct and request that she return to the courtroom. The doors opened, and Sarah Richardson entered, her presence commanding immediate respect. The gallery rose instinctively, not because of protocol, but out of genuine admiration. She made her way to the front of the courtroom, the same space where hours earlier she had stood as a defendant. Judge Richardson, Judge Thornton began, removing his reading glasses. I wish to vacate the fine imposed earlier and— Your Honor. Sarah interrupted gently. I must respectfully decline that offer. A murmur rippled through the crowded courtroom. The fine was appropriate for the violation committed. Vacating it now would only reinforce the problem we witnessed this morning. The sunlight streaming through the windows had softened to a warm afternoon glow, illuminating both judges as they faced this pivotal moment. Jenny Martinez watched from her desk, tears forming in her eyes as she witnessed what felt like history in the making. The issue at hand, Sarah continued, her voice clear and measured, is not about the fine. It's about the assumption that someone's appearance, gender, or race should determine how they are treated in our justice system. Officer Davidson, still present in the courtroom, nodded unconsciously. He had spent his lunch break reflecting on his own approach to issuing citations, wondering how many times he might have made similar assumptions. Your Honor. Sarah addressed Judge Thornton, I accept your apology, but I suggest we use this moment for something more meaningful than personal amends. She paused, looking around the packed courtroom. Let this be a turning point in how we administer justice in this courthouse. Judge Thornton leaned forward, listening intently. The stern judge of the morning had been replaced by someone who appeared genuinely eager to learn and change. I propose, Sarah continued, that we establish a training program for all court personnel, from judges to clerks to security officers. Not just about bias, but about the importance of allowing every person who comes before this court the dignity of being heard. The gallery remained silent, absorbing the significance of this moment. Several young law students in attendance were furiously taking notes, recognizing that they were witnessing a masterclass in turning conflict into opportunity. Robert Thompson, the bailiff, couldn't help but smile. In his 20 years at the courthouse, he had seen countless attempts at reforming the system, but something about this moment felt different, more authentic, more possible. Judge Richardson, Judge Thornton responded, his voice thick with emotion. "I would be honored to work with you on such an initiative. My conduct this morning demonstrated exactly why it's needed." Sarah nodded appreciatively, then reached into her briefcase. She pulled out a document, a draft proposal she had apparently prepared during the lunch break. "I took the liberty of outlining some initial thoughts," she said, handing it to Jenny to pass to Judge Thornton. The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed completely from the tense morning hours. What had started as a routine traffic court session had evolved into a moment of genuine transformation and hope for change. As Judge Thornton reviewed the proposal, Sarah addressed the packed gallery. "The justice system works best when it works for everyone," she said. "Today's events remind us that no matter how far we've come, we still have work to do." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courtroom floor, but the path forward had never been clearer. This turning point would be remembered not for the conflict that sparked it, but for the positive change it initiated in the halls of justice. By the next morning, the story of what transpired in courtroom 302 had gone viral. Local news channels camped outside the courthouse, social media buzzed with discussions, and legal blogs dissected every detail of the encounter between Judge Thornton and the Chief Justice nominee. The Milwaukee Daily Herald ran a front-page headline: "Justice Confronts Bias. Traffic Stop Becomes Turning Point." The article, accompanied by a photo of both judges, sparked intense discussions about unconscious bias in the legal system. Sarah's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the incident. Morning show producers, podcast hosts, and national news networks all wanted to hear her story. However, she maintained her characteristic grace, agreeing only to interviews that focused on the larger issues rather than personal drama. "This isn't about me or Judge Thornton," she explained to a local reporter. "It's about the thousands of people who enter our courtrooms every day, hoping to be treated fairly regardless of their appearance or background." Meanwhile, Judge Thornton faced his own moment of reckoning. Walking into the courthouse that morning, he noticed people looking at him differently. Some with disappointment, others with curiosity, but most seemed to be waiting to see how he would respond to this challenge. During his morning calendar, Judge Thornton's changed approach was immediately noticeable. He listened more carefully to each case, asked thoughtful questions, and ensured every person had a chance to speak. The regular courthouse staff exchanged surprised glances as they witnessed this transformation. Social media platforms exploded with discussions. Hashtag Justice is Blind and hashtag Courtroom Equality became trending topics. Law students across the country shared their own experiences with bias in the legal system, turning the incident into a catalyst for broader conversations. Jenny Martinez found herself fielding calls from judicial training programs nationwide, all interested in the reform proposals Sarah had drafted. "The response has been overwhelming," she told her colleagues during lunch. "People see this as a wake-up call for the entire judicial system." In the courthouse cafeteria, Officer Davidson sat with other law enforcement officers, engaging in honest discussions about their own biases. "How many times have we made snap judgments?" he asked his colleagues. "Maybe we need to look harder at our own assumptions." By afternoon, several judges from neighboring counties had reached out to Judge Thornton, admitting they had seen themselves in his actions. Many expressed interest in participating in the training program Sarah had proposed. The State Bar Association announced an emergency meeting to discuss implementing mandatory bias training for all legal professionals. Sarah's incident had become a case study in how subtle prejudices could affect even the most routine legal proceedings. Local community leaders organized a forum to discuss the broader implications. The event, hastily arranged in a nearby community center, drew hundreds of attendees. People shared their own courthouse experiences, both positive and negative, creating a powerful testimony to the need for change. Back in his chambers, Judge Thornton spent hours reviewing his past cases, particularly those involving minorities and women. His self-reflection led him to reach out to several legal advocacy groups, seeking their input on how to improve his courtroom practices. Sarah's clerk, David Chen, compiled a report of similar incidents from across the country. "What happened here isn't unique," he explained to a group of law students. "What's unique is how Judge Richardson turned it into an opportunity for systemic change." The courthouse security team, led by Bill Matthews, initiated their own discussions about treating all visitors with equal respect. Sometimes it's the small things, he said during a staff meeting. How we greet people, the assumptions we make, the tone we use. By late afternoon, the governor's office released a statement supporting Sarah's nomination for Chief Justice, citing her handling of the traffic court incident as evidence of her exceptional leadership qualities. The statement praised her ability to transform a potentially divisive moment into an opportunity for positive change. Local law schools requested Sarah's draft proposal, planning to incorporate it into their ethics curriculum. Professor Maria Rodriguez from State University Law School commented, "This incident provides a perfect real-world example of how bias can manifest in our justice system." As the day drew to a close, the lesson was clear. Change often comes from unexpected moments, and true leadership means using those moments to create positive transformation. The incident in courtroom 302 had become more than a news story. It was now a movement for change in the justice system. 3 months after the traffic court incident, the state capitol building buzzed with excitement. The Senate chamber was packed for Sarah Richardson's Chief Justice confirmation ceremony. Judge Thornton, sitting in the front row, looked markedly different from the stern figure who had presided over his courtroom that fateful morning. The transformation that had begun in courtroom 302 had spread far beyond Milwaukee's courthouse. Sarah's judicial reform program, now known as the Richardson Initiative, had been adopted by courts in 12 states. The program emphasized listening to all voices, recognizing unconscious bias, and ensuring equal treatment regardless of appearance or status. "I, Sarah Richardson, do solemnly swear," she began, her voice clear and strong as she took the oath of office. The historic moment, the swearing-in of the state's first black female Chief Justice, was being broadcast live across the state. In the audience, her parents, the former school janitor and bus driver, wiped tears from their eyes. Judge Thornton had become an unexpected ally in the fight for judicial reform. His public transformation from a harsh, dismissive judge to an advocate for change had inspired many of his colleagues. "My experience with Chief Justice Richardson taught me that true justice requires both wisdom and humility," he told a gathering of judges at a recent conference. The courthouse where the incident occurred had undergone its own transformation. Jenny Martinez, now the head of the new Judicial Equity Office, oversaw training programs for court staff. The once dreaded courtroom 302 had become a model for respectful and fair judicial proceedings. Officer Davidson had also embraced change. He developed a training program for police officers about checking their biases during traffic stops. "Every person we stop is someone's parent, child, or even a future Chief Justice," he would tell his trainees, often sharing his part in Sarah's story. The State Bar Association reported a significant decrease in complaints about judicial bias in the months following the implementation of the Richardson Initiative. Courts across the state had installed suggestion boxes, created citizen advisory boards, and established regular community feedback sessions. At her first press conference as Chief Justice, Sarah addressed the gathered media with characteristic grace. "The incident that brought us here today could have remained just another example of bias in our system," she said. "Instead, it became a catalyst for positive change, thanks to everyone who chose to learn and grow from it." Judge Thornton's own courtroom had become unrecognizable from its former atmosphere. He now started each session by reminding everyone present that justice requires us to look beyond our first impressions. His transformation had earned him a new nickname among courthouse staff, the listener. The law schools in the state had incorporated the traffic court incident into their ethics curriculum. Professor Rodriguez's case study, "The Traffic Stop That Changed Justice," had become required reading in judicial training programs nationwide. Sarah's nephew, whose emergency appendectomy had indirectly led to the speeding ticket, had recovered fully and now dreamed of becoming a judge himself. "My aunt showed me that true justice means treating everyone with respect," he told his middle school class during the Career Day presentation. The courthouse security team, led by Bill Matthews, had developed a new greeting protocol ensuring every person entering the building was treated with equal dignity. "We're the first face of justice people see," he would remind his staff. "Let's make sure it's a face that welcomes everyone equally." On her first day as Chief Justice, Sarah made a point of visiting courtroom 302. Standing at the same spot where she had once been dismissed as just another traffic violator, she addressed a group of new judges. "Our greatest responsibility," she told them, is not just to apply the law, but to ensure that every person who enters our courts feels heard and respected. Judge Thornton, who had considered retiring after the incident, instead found new purpose in mentoring young judges. "My greatest mistake became my greatest teaching tool," he often said. His honest acknowledgement of his biases and commitment to change had earned him newfound respect among his peers. As the sun set on Sarah's first day as Chief Justice, she stood at her new office window, looking out over the city. The traffic ticket that could have been just another example of bias in the system had instead become a turning point for justice reform. The lesson learned in courtroom 302 would continue to influence the justice system for generations to come.